Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the midweek show. We are discussing today the decline in council housing, 69% drop in Fife council housing in the last 4. We're going to have a chat today with some guests about that, so let's roll the video. So guys, council housing and the decline over the years is the topic today. To help me discuss things today, I've got Perry McIntosh. Good afternoon, Perry. How are
Hi,
you?
Richard. Good afternoon. Yeah, I'm great. Thank you. It's been a good Tuesday so far.
It has. It's been a really busy day today. I love your flowers in the background.
Thank you. Spring has sprung.
Yeah, I know. And we've also got Andrea Stanford this afternoon. Good afternoon, Andrea.
Hi, Richard. Hi, Perry.
Hi.
So yeah, I think a really important subject, especially in today's, obviously the way the market is and the way housing is. There is a housing crisis, and as I say, obviously 69% drop in Fife council housing progressively over the last 40 years. A few interesting facts is I've got here in 1981, 59% of properties in Fife were council houses. And today that figure stands at just 18%, a proportional drop of 69%, which is amazing when you think about it. Obviously, there's been a lot of changes and a lot of factors that influence that over the years. Do you agree that you have noticed that over the years with council housing and the current situation?
Yeah, absolutely. No, haven't we? Everyone seems to be struggling to get property at the moment, whether they're buying or whether they're renting. Obviously, we've got an armchair company that you cover, Richard, in the letting side of things, and there's just as much high demand for a private let as there is for private purchasing properties at the moment. So certainly something that we see on a day-to-day basis, people speaking about how they're struggling to secure something for themselves. And also, actually, if families have had a council property and their family has grown, what they're finding is they're actually squeezed into the house that they're in because they can't go on to a bigger property because there basically just isn't the supply there in the council environment for them to have that. You know, I've got a family member at the moment who's got 2 kids and they're in a 2-bedroom, but you know, they've got a teenage son and a young daughter, so it's really difficult for them to move on to that in that particular area. But they love the area, they love the schooling, so they don't want to move, so they're having to kind of make do and end, I guess, which a lot of people are doing just now, aren't they?
Yeah, I see that. That's a brilliant example. I see that quite a lot. Obviously, like you say, on the letting side of things, people come into the private sector because they didn't have any option in the social housing. There's no council houses to accommodate them as they grow as a family or they grow as a unit. Yeah, I see that a lot. I mean, why do you think the number of council houses has dropped so much in the last 40 years? I mean, it's quite a drastic change over progressively over the years. I think obviously we know that. Obviously, people were at one point allowed to then obviously buy their council houses, which took a lot from the stock that was already there. So, I mean, do you any of you have a view on why you think it has dropped so much?
I think it's dropped because they're not building more new council housing stock. I mean, they are starting to gradually build it, but they've just been very, very slow. One of the other things is that people who have lived in their council houses for a long time that didn't want to buy them are still there. It could be an 80, 90-year-old lady sitting in a 3-bedroom council house while people are struggling to get upgraded council house. But you can't force that person to move. But I mean, the old pensioners' houses that they used to have, the little 1-bedroom ones, they've been getting sold off. They were bought and now they've been sold off, and you've got, you know,
and do you know how popular they are
and they're
now?
incredibly popular. Yeah. But that's why. But it was all quite political, really, back in, you know, Margaret Thatcher's day. I think she had this vision that the more people that owned their homes would be voters for the Conservative Party. I may be wrong in that. That is my own personal view, and I'm not saying that is what it is.
In your opinion, Andrea?
In my opinion. But, I mean, it certainly was, you know, it was a big boost for her that she needed at that time that got her into, you know, to become Prime Minister.
Yeah.
And now they're they're hardly reaping the benefits of it now, because they're now seeing so many people displaced with no chance of getting a home.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I totally agree with that, and for me, it's definitely that they just aren't building enough council housing. Obviously, married with the fact that obviously people were allowed to. I mean, obviously, you're allowed to no longer allowed to purchase your council house, but at some for a period of time you were, and it did have an impact on the amount of available properties for people in the social housing sector. But yeah, definitely for me that they're not building enough council housing. And not just in Fife, I think that's in the country in general. Well, I know it's in the country in general, across the country. So, but yeah, the ability of local authorities to build council houses came into law in July 1919, with the 1919 Housing and Town Planning Act. Now, it was one of the most important pieces of domestic legislation passed after World War One, and was the first time in the UK that national public funded system for providing housing was made for the masses and basically rolled out. It was paid for mostly by the central government, and provided by local authorities, obviously the councils and things, and public utilities societies, which in later years became today's housing associations, which obviously they are responsible for obviously building the social housing in the Fife area, and again obviously in the areas across the country. So yeah, I mean it's amazing. Between 1919 and 1979, 6.94 million council houses were built. Now let's just have a look. I've got actually a graphic here that will demonstrate that visually to put it into perspective. So you can see here, obviously, I mean, look at the spike here, and the amount of houses that were built during that time, and then as you head into the late like the 80s, late 80s into the beginning of the 90s, you can see how that dramatically drops all the way down from the obviously that's 1969 here, around about that time, and then for there it progressively obviously drops. And then you're down here. This is 19. That's 1985. It peaks again, but obviously as you come into the 90s, you can see. So you can see that trend there and the number of houses built. But that's an amazing amount of properties to be built in that period of time, and then it just falls off basically, or levels off, which is interesting. And just over 1 million council houses were built between 1920 and 1939, whilst 5,800,000 and odds obviously council houses were built between 1946 and 1979. And this is compared to just over 4.5 million private houses and just over 250,000 housing association properties in the same time frame, from obviously 1946 to 1979. So yeah, I mean, a lot of stats here obviously about the amount of properties being built, but a drastic change to what we are looking at today, and obviously populations today in comparison to back then. So obviously, there's no surprise that we're in the position where there is a housing crisis and people don't have anywhere to live.
Absolutely. Think about history back then as well, though. Primarily, most people did have council property, didn't they?
Yeah,
the higher population had that. So, I mean, between 1946 and 1979, the council houses were the dominant force in British housing, and that's certainly not the case just now, is it? And that all changed in 1979 because of the topic that Andrea has already mentioned. So, you know, many people do believe that Margaret Thatcher was the architect following the tenants in the councils and putting the properties up and allowing people to buy their home. But interestingly, council house tenants have been able to buy their council houses from as early as 1930s.
Yeah, so it does go back. Yeah, you're right.
But it was possible to do it, albeit that it was little or no discount. But as late as 1977, the Labour Housing Minister published a green paper extolling the virtues of home ownership and council tenants being able to buy their homes at a discount. And I think that's where we really saw that influx, Andrea, wasn't it? And when all the right to buy scheme and the council discounts came into play, people suddenly thought, actually, I can own this, you know, which was never something really that group of people at that time would ever have anticipated. So opened up a whole new opportunity for people to become homeowners and get on the property ladder.
Yeah, I looked up some stats myself, actually, off a different website. You know, the discount that were applied to council houses for purchase, you could get up to 70% off a flat, discount from a flat of its market value, and also up to 60% of the market value of a house. Now, that is a huge saving for someone, and also the added benefit was that they didn't need a deposit, because the equity that was within the house was regarded as being the deposit. So although they do have, or did have, to live in the property for a certain number of years before they could make that purchase, you know, ranging from 2 years up to, and depending on how long they'd been in the house, they could get a higher, you know, up to the highest amount of the property.
Yeah. See, you guys will remember this. I don't. I know it happened, but obviously, obviously a complete shift in times now, obviously, to what the situation we're in.
Yeah, but the last council house was sold in 2016.
Yeah, but I mean, when it first initially rolled out and things, I mean, it was way back. Obviously, I mean,
I think worryingly though is that they still allow the sale of, you know, the housing association houses, and we've seen quite a few of those, you know, through our own properties. You know, that you go in and you buy a part share, and then, you know, in a year, and you can buy another 25% of it, or you can sell your 25% after a couple of years. Or you can sell the whole lot. It's not just your own share. So there's still stock getting lost there in the housing market that technically should be for people who really can't afford to get, you know, the full whack of a house.
Yeah. It's like we were saying earlier there, Richard, about the stats. You know, up until 1979, nearly 7 million council houses were built.
Yeah.
And that all seemed to change in 1979, didn't it?
Yeah.
You know, after that general election, the Tory government drafted the Tenants' Right Act in Scotland of 1980, and that gave the Right to Buy scheme that we're talking about really to come into effect. And that became law in the autumn of 1980, and that's when I think things really took off for people, and that's when we started to see everyone suddenly deciding that they had a great opportunity to own property, something that had been beyond them. And certainly in Fife, we saw that quite often in some of the town areas that we are, with such a big mining community, and all of a sudden they had this great opportunity not only to work hard for a living, but also to have something that represented all that work by then owning their own home. And I think that's when you really start to see it take off. And that new law established a right for most council tenants who had been in their homes for at least 3 years or more to have that discount. Discount started at 33% and then increased by 1% for each extra year, up to a maximum of 50%. So, I mean, if you think about it, back then in the 1980s, if you were able to, you know, if you've been living in that property for more than 3 years, say 10 years, you had the opportunity to own it for half of its street value, which was massive really for tenants then. If the tenants sold the houses within the first 5 years of ownership, they had to have a proportionate repayment. You know, they had to pay some of that discount back. But, you know, it was still a very driven thing, because Andrea said earlier on there about, you know, deposits, etc. Their value of their property would have increased anyway. So whatever they were paying back, it was still a fantastic investment for them, and it gave them the monetary funds to then perhaps upgrade, move to a different area, or actually then assist family members to then buy their properties. And you'd absolutely saw that knock-on effect in the early 80s, I would say. And that's when it became a bit of a boom for us, didn't it?
Yeah, and then you see that, I'll just quickly flick back, and that just, what you explained there, Perry, it's totally depicted in that graph there. You can see it clearly, like I say, for 1979, and you can see that decline, and then how that trend follows the stats that you just obviously covered there. But between 1980 and 1989, just under 970,558 council houses nationally were sold at a discount. Yet the issue was, when a council house was sold, it took that house out of the council's portfolio, and this is, I think, what obviously started this problem. And it wasn't there for future generations. So from the start, there was limitations on local authorities' use of monies from the council houses sales, as most of it had to be given to the central government of London, meaning only about 390,000, or just over 390,560 new council houses were built between 1980 and 1989, looking at the numbers locally. If that makes sense. I know when you talk about figures, sometimes it could be a bit. So in 1981, there was just over 69,000 council houses in Fife. Today there is only 29,000, well, 29,009. And obviously, I know that they are trying to build council houses, but they're never going to be able to meet the demand of what's needed. They're falling far short of what's needed to be built in the way of social housing, or council housing in Fife and across the country. So no wonder, yeah.
It's no wonder when you see those stats, though, that the country has a housing crisis. You can kind of actually see how that is. But yet, as the regular readers, any regular readers will know, the devil is always in the detail, and the devil is in the humble housing association, isn't it?
Yeah.
And while housing association was a great idea at the time, is it really delivering what's needed now in regards to property and management of that property for individuals and getting themselves on that ladder? And the Tory general election manifesto in 1979 had proposed the rights for both council house and housing association tenants to buy their houses under the rights of the right to buy scheme. But the Conservatives argued that housing association property shouldn't be, and they obtained government funding. So the subject was that the right to buy proposal for councils, and the government won the vote in the Commons, yet lost the vote in the Lords, meaning that housing association tenants could not buy their homes at a large discount. So while private housing could be, in regards to council housing, when it's swapped over to association, that's when you started to see a bit of a decline, really, in people being able to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the government have tried to make some kind of compensation towards what is lacking out there at the moment in two ways. Obviously, any new housing development that's getting built, there has to be a certain percentage of those properties are built as affordable homes. I can't remember the exact percentage, but if you're building over a certain number of houses, you have to build affordable homes within that. You also have to make a contribution to the education department as well. Not sure a lot of people know that one, but obviously if you're building over 10 homes, you have to make quite a large contribution to the schools.
Yeah.
The other one that came to my mind was the LIFT scheme, which is low income first time buyers. That's a part buy, part share scheme with the government, and then you can purchase more back of the property, or you can buy more of the equity in the property that the government has helped you to buy. So that has helped offset some of the people that maybe wouldn't have been able to get a foot on the ladder in the first place.
That's true, and it has helped some people. We hear that quite often, don't we?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen it help a few people, obviously, and that's what it's designed to do. But a lot more does need to be done, obviously, to kind of.
Yeah. I think there are always going to be people out there who will never be a homeowner, and they probably don't wish to be a homeowner. Because a lot of people. I was just going to say,
there's a lot of people who don't wish to own their home. I think it's always been quite a big thing for people that want to own their home, and now it's becoming a wee bit more common that. And I see it quite a lot of people prefer to rent and choose it as a lifestyle choice as it suits them a lot better. It works out a lot better for them in a financial aspect and a lifestyle aspect and things as well. So I do see that quite a lot.
So if there's no council houses for them to go to, and there's long waiting lists for social housing, where are the people going in the meantime, Richard?
Well, I mean, obviously they're coming to the private sector, and we see that quite a lot, and that's what we touched on at the beginning, when there is a lack of social and council housing for people like Perry says, obviously expanding families and people that are just outgrowing their existing properties, then they don't have the option to go down the route with a local authority or a council, because they don't have the stock to obviously supply them with a property, so they're coming to the private rented sector, and that's why I think we see such an influx. I mean, the letting side of things is so fast paced, and it just seems to continue to get busier and busier, and that's the knock-on effect from the lack of council housing. But actually, obviously, the number of houses obviously been between 1949 and 1979. So the average number of housing association properties built annually was just over 8,500. Since 1979 to until today, it has been just over 5,000 per year, and just over 31,500 per year in 2010. So that's quite interesting statistic. So the government encourages councils to transfer the remaining council houses to housing association schemes, and they have done since 1986. Now, the advantage to these stock transfers was the government allowed housing associations to access private funding to improve their existing properties and buy new ones. Good news for existing tenants complaining that the local authorities never upgraded their homes and things. Obviously, you hear that obviously with a lot of the bigger portfolios for housing associations that obviously they upgrades and things, and if they do decide to do upgrades, it's a long time to go to get that, obviously execute that whole process. So moreover, the Tory government liked stock transfers, as it allowed them to dismantle council housing from the inside. But interestingly, Labour expanded the stock transfer process in 1997 and further reduced the eligibility for council tenants' right to buy, meaning the number of council houses, the number of council tenants exercising the right to buy then declined considerably. Meaning today, even though the provisions for council housing has dropped, like the proverbial stone, the number of council housing association properties in Fife has increased from 912 in 1981 to just under 8,000, or 7,948 today. So that's some interesting facts there about obviously how things have, the progression of things and how things have changed, I think. Which
I
is
think
not
it does, yeah. And it goes back to what you said earlier, Richard, as well. I think one of the things that we certainly see, because I've got a few friends that are in association properties, and we've got a few dotted around leaving that have just recently been built.
Yeah.
And my son's actually in one in Aberdeen as well, and he was really fortunate. So what you have there then is you're not going into a council building or flat that has been built in the 1900s that is needing vastly renovated, is very outdated. He walked into what was almost like a purpose-built private apartment that no one had lived in. He got the keys on day one after it being completed. And it's a beautiful apartment with a lovely fitted kitchen and like walk-in living space and all the mod cons and nothing needing doing to it. So when you make the comment earlier on about some people choose to be in that environment, absolutely they do, because he could not afford to purchase one of those apartments in Aberdeen. So he now lives in a fantastic apartment that is comfortable for him on his monthly billing, that doesn't need any maintenance or anything done to it, and has quite a nice lifestyle there because of the fact that, you know, that he's got this great property that ticks all his needs and is a healthy place to live as well, and is new and is fresh and doesn't need anything doing, versus maybe having had to go into an old council housing, as we've described, that the council just don't have the money to invest because they're struggling to try to build new housing. So it's that catch-22 that they're kind of in that portfolio of pain, I guess, aren't they?
Yeah, that's a brilliant example of it. I mean, obviously a property like that in Aberdeen that you've just described would come at a premium, and obviously, but that the lifestyle for him is that for your son is that obviously he could live there, he can afford to live there, and obviously, so it's a lifestyle choice for him, and it works for him financially and things as well. And we see it time and time again, whether they're coming and again whether they're coming through into obviously the private sector for private lets and things, but some of them are like, why would I want to buy my house? I could stay here, I could have this lovely newly refurbished property. When they take into the consideration the financial aspect of it, when you factor in obviously your mortgage and bills and things, and you know, a lot on top when you and then obviously insurances and upkeep and you know, everything that comes with being a homeowner, as you all know yourselves as well. Is it all it's cracked up to be? Do you know what I mean? Is it when you've got either an association or a private landlord or whatever looking after the property and paying for all the maintenance, and if things are to go wrong, whether it be a boiler fix or something with the roof or a mutual repair and things, things can be costly. And I mean, you all know over the years you'll probably come up against it. And I mean, I've only been a homeowner for 6 years, and I've already had the experience of bills for repairs and upkeeps, and obviously I need to take into consideration insurances and mortgages, and do you know what I mean? There's a lot to take into considerations, and maybe there's a lot to be said for staying in rented accommodation and the benefits of having that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think with housing association properties as well, I mean, having grown in Fife eightfold over the last 10 years, how do you think that that's changed the dynamics of the Fife property market in the last 40 years now?
I think it has changed it vastly, and I think we've went from like you say, of us originally, there was so much social housing and things, and then we went to this kind of nation of obviously homeowners. Everybody wanted to own their home, and I think now it's kind of flipped it on its head, and we're kind of turning the other way. And I think, apart from the fact that maybe people are doing it as a lifestyle choice, some people don't have the choice because they can't be a homeowner. So obviously, that's where the lack of social housing really comes into an important factor for obviously housing people, not just in Fife, across the whole country. Because without that, then some people, they wouldn't have a roof over their head. And that's where it becomes really important, and a really important part from the housing sector, and obviously from a homeless point of view and things as well. I think I know a lot of people that work within the council and things, and obviously just conversations that the amount of people that are added to the homeless register and things is just unreal. I mean, unusually high, and it has been for some time. And it shouldn't be like that, especially not, I think, in this time, in this day and age. We shouldn't have such an issue of potential homelessness and a lack of housing and basically basic human necessities, I think, in this day and age, which a lot of people are without. And that comes hand in hand with the lack of housing. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I do. And the people that don't have the choice are the people that I really feel for. You know, when you see how many homes have been sold, you know, to private people, you know, people in the private sector, and it doesn't give those people a chance anymore. And there is just nothing else out there for them that is affordable.
Yeah.
And then they're at the mercy, you know, of landlords that will decide what they want to charge. You know, the council was always a good man. You had a good, solid, you know, structure around you. You knew that somebody was on hand, sort of like 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, if there was anything went wrong. And a lot of people don't have that in the landlords, because there's a lot of landlords out there that are just not, you know, cutting it when it comes to the care of their tenants.
Yeah, there is landlords out there, but I do have to jump to the defence of private landlords. Obviously, I do represent quite a few, and the benefits to the private sector, especially at this time when we don't have enough council and social housing and things, that the amount of housing that we provide for people that are in circumstances like that, especially at certain areas in Fife and things, there's a lot of vulnerable people who come to us, and we provide housing for, who have exacerbated every other option and are basically otherwise going to be going down the homeless route.
Yeah, and that's fantastic that you have so many landlords that are happy to, you know, take people in those circumstances. But, you know, I mean, I've had the experience of, you know, friends who have not been able to, you know, they've had to go down huge red tape routes and everything because they had a large family and no income that was coming in, and they really just couldn't get anything, and they were desperate. They were sofa surfing.
Do you know what I think, and what I've noticed as well recently, and there's a few, I mean, obviously predominantly I do sales and I do lettings and things, but I do sales now and again, and obviously there's a few I've done, and they've ended up being sold. They were ex-local authority properties, and they've been sold back to the council, and I'm sure you've dealt with a few of them, particularly over the last year and two, and the council are actually buying these properties back at the home report or even above value, so that obviously to replenish their stock in their portfolio. Because that's where we've got to the point. So I think it's quite strange that we've went from a time where they were selling them to people, and now they're buying them back. So obviously, whether that was the right decision for them in the first place or not, But yeah, I have seen quite a lot of that. And interestingly enough, I mentioned this in one of my videos the other day, but there's around about 2,000 just empty properties in Fife, lying empty. And I think that's, I mean, in all honesty, I do see quite a lot of empty properties. Obviously, I do. I'm out and about quite a lot, and I've noticed that there's a lot of empty properties, whether they're obviously privately owned or a mixture of obviously empty council houses and things. But there's a lot of houses that could be utilised for housing. When you see the situation that we're in with homelessness or potential homelessness, and even just in Fife, and then you think of all these empty houses that are sitting there, which could be somebody's home. There really has to be something that could be done about that. And I think the big thing that I see now is that investors, private investors, are looking for these empty houses that are maybe a wee bit run down, needing renovated, picking them up, renovating them, and putting them on the private. Obviously, the letting side, and they're entering into the private sector, which is, in my opinion, is providing the housing that wouldn't have been there otherwise. So
it's interesting. We're talking about that and supply and demand, etc. But would it surprise you to learn that the number of people who own their Fife property today is very similar to what it was 20 years ago?
But that would surprise me. I mean, it's funny because you wouldn't think that. You would think it would be different, but like if you're saying like it's fairly similar, then yeah, that is surprising to me. What about you, Andrea?
I'm surprised. I mean, I've been in a very fortunate position that I've always, apart from when my father was in the army, he came out of the army when I was 4. I have lived in a private house ever since, so I feel I've been in a very privileged position to be able to say that. I would hate to have to try and be waiting for council property now, being on a waiting list and then having to take the first thing that they offer you, or you get put to the bottom of the list. I mean, that, you know, you've maybe got your children settled at school, you don't want to move, but as Perry was saying earlier, you know, somebody's happy in the area they're in, they just need more room. There's got to be something that can be done that can streamline those that don't need the amount of rooms now to those that do, and get them swapped.
Yeah, well, I mean, they did try. They implemented obviously the bedroom tax thing, and that obviously before to try and tackle that situation as well. It's funny you say about the council waiting list. I wouldn't even call it a waiting list now, because I mean the amount of people that tell me that they've been on it for I've got years. I mean, it's such a long waiting list, even here in Fife, and obviously I'm certain that across the country it's the same for a lot of local authorities.
But I think the fact that it's so level for 20 years, even like before the property boom started, is quite an interesting fact. It's not something I had thought until we started kind of researching the article. And I think it's just that even though we've had a large drop in the number of council houses and an increase in the number of housing association properties, the number of people owning their own home has remained relatively the same. In some areas of Fife, this has actually increased. The significant issue is the growth of the private rented sector. We've talked about that. I mean, the private landlord sector is a huge growing environment, and everyone's got a different view of that. But it's almost as if people who used to rent from the council are now renting from private landlords. Are you seeing that, Richard?
Yeah, and I do see it a lot, and I think that's married with the fact that, well, like I say, waiting list is so long. There is such a shortage in houses, as you said, Perry. As family units grow and people expand and things, they're just they can't facilitate housing for them. So the only route for them to go is to the private sector. And I think hand in hand with so many new investors coming into the market recently and picking up all these empty properties and renovating them, bringing them back to life and putting them back into use and providing housing. I see it progressing every day.
I mean, it raises two really big questions, doesn't it? The question is it right for a private individual to make money from tenants who rent from them as opposed to local authority? Or are private landlords providing better types and choices and quality of accommodation for their tenants, albeit at a higher rent rate? than if they were renting a council house. What's your thoughts on that, Richard? I mean, you live this every day.
Yeah, well, I would totally agree. I think it is right that they do that, because otherwise, then if they're not doing it, then it's not going to get done, and then ultimately, we would be in an even worse position with a housing crisis. I think. I mean, we're in a housing crisis as it is, but I think to take away the private sector, and why shouldn't landlords, within reason and within like market, obviously market restrictions and things, that they bring properties up to a really good standard, look after them, put tenants in, and command obviously the rent, even if it is slightly higher than maybe what local authorities or local councils would charge. Yeah, I would agree. I think it should be done. That's not what. Well, of course I do. I do it every day.
I mean, it's an industry, isn't it? The private rental market is an industry, and nobody goes into industry not wanting to make money. So, I mean, it's like your shopkeeper. They're not going to. They have to make a cut at the end of the day on the goods that they sell, and landlords, what they're selling is accommodation. So, and they need to be able to make something out of it as well.
I do think, though, I think it's quite right that they do, as long as they are doing it properly. And I think that obviously if they're providing a certain level of housing, which is obviously like obviously I don't know if you watched yesterday, I don't know about like refurb and what kind of level to provide housing at and make sure it's compliant, and obviously landlords and agents like myself that obviously manage for landlords and things have a duty of care for tenants to make sure that they are comfortable where they live, they're happy where they live, they're safe where they live. So yeah, I mean, there is obviously a small amount of landlords across the country who are classed as maybe rogue landlords and things, who don't follow the rules and provide obviously housing that I wouldn't consider obviously adequate or suitable for people. So there is that element, but the majority of people that are wanting to be landlords want to be landlords because they see it as a positive impact for housing and obviously and things as well, but it also benefits them. Do you mean if they've got money to invest into property and help provide housing and make themselves money through running a business ultimately, because that's what it is, then I think it's definitely something that should be done.
I think as well as providing a service, though, I think that a good landlord also is providing actually a better home. We spoke earlier on, didn't we, about the council and the investment in property, etc. But what we see, and certainly what I see from the landlords that I've interacted with, is that actually the standard of living is so much better for the private tenant as well. And there is an element of security there too for that private tenant. And I really do believe if it wasn't for the growth of the buy-to-let landlords, which began in the early 2000s, we'd have an even bigger housing crisis than we have at the moment.
Yeah, I would totally agree, and that's what I was just touching on there. I would totally agree with that. And Perry, you know from experience yourself, you sold your house, and in between buying your next property, you let a property. It was one that we had. Would you have got that type of property on from the council, or would you, or in between, you wouldn't have been able to get? I mean, obviously you weren't in that position, but just as an example, in reference to the quality of the property and things.
Yeah, I mean, we were very fortunate. I mean, the quality of that property was high end, but I wasn't paying high end rent.
I was
paying a fair price for a great accommodation, and I certainly got the attention to care if anything was, broken, needed repairing, anything like that had happened. But it was, as you had mentioned earlier on, Richard, about the approach that we take and many of our landlords do. It was newly furbished, it was new bathroom, it was new kitchen area, new carpet, newly decorated. So it was presented to me as if I had just gone and bought it, if I'm being honest with you. So for me, as a tenant at that time, it was a very positive experience. And I think that there will be thousands of tenants out there who are having that positive experience. And that's why I say about the fact that, actually, if those individuals aren't there renting out their high-end properties, then where do other people live, and what would the crisis be like then? Because actually it would be a hell of a lot worse in the situation that we're in at the moment. So yes, there are businessmen out there and women out there who are doing this for for profit, but actually they're also providing a really much needed service, and they're doing that to a high-end standard from what I've experienced, and I can only go about what I'm experienced, and that's certainly what I found.
Yeah, and I do feel like from my experience as an agent and things, obviously I started back in 2010, and I could see how things have progressed and how things have changed, and how legislation and landlord registration and things that obviously have governed the private sector to ensure that it's. I mean, I know some landlords obviously do find it frustrating because there is a lot to contend with, and that's obviously goes hand in hand with having an agent like myself obviously look after things because that's their job. And if you're a private landlord, sometimes you don't always have the time to do that because you've got other things and other projects on the go. But in order to be a good landlord and provide the right level of housing, in my opinion, is to abide by all these rules. And there's landlords get a bad name, and you will hear it a lot. And I think it's a shame because, I mean, there's a very, very small percentage that I would class as maybe the rogue or bad landlords. The majority are all very obviously enthusiastic about their venture to do buy-to-let investment and provide housing and things like that. So, yeah, and like you said, it's quite good to have somebody with an experience as well. I mean, I let property before I bought mine as well. Subsequently, I'm in my house that I used to let. I bought it, but that's a long story. But do you know what I mean? Well, I let this property before I bought it, and I would never have bought it if I thought it was substandard. Or do you know what I mean? So there's another example. But the private sector, if we did not have it and have the housing that, especially here, I think particularly here in Fife, what I've experienced over the years, we would have an even worse problem of housing and homelessness and things. There is areas throughout Fife where there is a lot of vulnerable people and struggle to maybe financially and housing and things. And I've helped a lot of them myself through the years, and I know that there's a lot of other landlords that have. And I think without us being there, where would these people be? Where would they have lived? Where would their kids have lived? So there's a lot to be said for it.
Yeah, I mean, it's been 14 years, back in 2008, that the local and central government really had their hands tied regarding funding and everything, and it basically just crumbled from there. But they do say that, you know, it's been the humble landlord, private landlord, that stepped up and supplied in excess of 2.3 million additional rental properties since 2001. The housing and has housed has housed over 5.5 million people. So these landlords have saved the day.
Yeah.
So hats off to them.
I would definitely agree.
The rental sell-off in the 80s.
Yeah. So I think think of the situation we're in just now with housing and things, and if you think about over the years, if you were to take out those we'll say nearly 2.5 million houses, take that out of the equation, how would housing be able to be provided to these people? So yeah, you need to look at it like that. So yeah, I do think the humble landlord has played a big key part in that. And
I think so. When you look at 2.3 million additional rental properties since 2001. So in 20 years, 2.3 million properties. And I don't know how much of a proportion that is Fife, right enough, but if we go back to some of that earlier stats that we talked about, from 1981 until present day, so that's 40 years, Housing Association only produced just under 8,000 houses.
Yeah.
So how do you compare that to 2.3 million properties in half the time, you know? So there is absolutely a massive demand for it, and supply is being created for private landlords because, as Andrea rightly said, you know, councils you just don't have the funding to build the number of properties that are needed.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that for me, as more housing needs to be built, and that's always something that we'll have to keep pushing that there needs to be more housing built for the councils and social housing. And in the meantime, and for a long time, it's going to be the private sector, I think, that obviously is the buffer for that becoming a bigger problem than what it is. And it has been for some time. And I think the figures that we've spoke about today and things really demonstrate that. And quite a lot of interesting facts we've covered today, especially with the figures and how the trends from obviously back in the early 80s or 1979 obviously, and how that trend's changed right up into the 90s and then to where we are today. And then the introduction of, there's always been private landlords, but the influx of that, obviously, over the years, and how that's changed things and the positive impact it's had on housing.
I think so. I mean, in regards to my thoughts on the humble landlord, when we look at those numbers, you can absolutely see that they're impacting that, and they're providing roofs over people's heads, and quality product as well, from what I've experienced. And I think without that, then actually there'd be much more homelessness out there. And so, Fife Properties is a company. We have an arm to our business that's letting. Richard, you're the lettings director, of course, everyone will know that, but we're here to help. And if anyone is struggling and they're finding themselves in that situation, and even if it's not from us or they're just looking for some guidance, we've got experts that can help with that. And people should certainly reach out, whether you're a landlord wanting to get into the business and maybe needing some investment and guidance, or whether you're someone who's really struggling for property or needing to upgrade. Please do reach out, because we're here to help and give advice to you and see how we can potentially swath that pain that your situation's got you in at the moment.
Yeah, and property standards such a big thing for me, and that's what I done in the Wealth Creation show yesterday, about how property improvements and things are so important to making your tenant happy, making but in turn making your actual rental property profitable as well. So if you put the money in, you get the money out, and have a happy tenant is a big part of a successful letting process in a buy-to-let business. So it's not just about landlords making profit. It's about, obviously, there's a whole scenario which marries up together, and a tenant's happiness and a property's standard and safety levels and things all marry in together with that, and that's a very important aspect about it. Andrea,
my final thoughts on it is that I feel for the people that are homeless. You said, Richard, there's so many empty properties out there. Something has to be done about that.
Yeah.
There's no need for people to be homeless in 2022.
No, in this day and age, it shouldn't be such a big issue as what it is. But yeah, I mean, the vast amount of empty properties, it's scary that they could be sitting empty and people could be sitting without a home.
I think there was a scheme down in England, actually, somewhere, where people, if they found an empty property and they managed to convince the owner of it that they could live in it if they did it up. I don't know if that's been spread throughout Scotland. Or
it's not something that's come to me. I mean, I think that the best solution to the empty property thing is investors picking them up and renovating and getting them back into usage as actual housing. And the thing is, with the private sector, it makes it brings available housing back to anyone. So I mean, you don't have to be obviously certain criteria and things apply, but I mean, they are open to anybody for available housing. Whereas the social housing things and that is obviously you're limited and supplied anyway. So yeah, I think it's really important, and I think that, as you said, Perry, if there's anybody out there who needs any advice and things about obviously anything to do with buy-to-let or investment, or obviously even the renovation process and things, and what kind of levels, like I touched on yesterday, drop a comment in the comments or message me direct, and I'd be happy to help. And I'm sure you guys, if you could provide any help or assistance to anybody, which would help them along in their journey with housing, you would be happy to do that as well.
Absolutely.
So guys, as I say, there's quite a lot of interesting stats and facts in there, and things that, like, you even brought to attention here, Perry, that obviously in the last 20 years the actual amount of homeowners hasn't really changed that much. Which is surprising even to myself, but it's not until you actually look at facts like that and think about it that it makes sense to you, or it becomes apparent to you. So yeah, but the blog for this one will be in the link, so people can have a read and look at the stats in more detail. And we'll follow up with the podcast for this for people to listen back to. If you've not got time to sit and watch the show, please do, because there's quite a lot of interesting stats and things in there. But thanks very much for joining me this afternoon, guys. That was good.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, guys. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. See you later. Okay, guys. Bye.